Today I want to cover creating diagrams in Revit. So you see here that I've got a kind of site design maybe of a housing or building layout, um, and I've created in a kind of vector style diagram using Revit. So I just want to show you how you might go about creating something like this in the Revit environment. So I've actually placed four different versions of this on a sheet. You can see up in the top left, we start with, say, stage one, site requirements. And these are all these represent each of our buildings that we're going to place on our site. So we can take it that these are maybe 10 three-bed houses that we want to place on our site. We know that we also want five, three or four or five-bed houses as well. So I've created just a volume using the Create in Mass Place tool. And then we've got some smaller buildings here, maybe kind of single-story, two-bed houses as well. And I've created these in the 3D environment, and then I've just duplicated them. Now you could use something like design options or phasing as well, but I've just duplicated these around in my 3D environment. I'll show you how to do that now. Then kind of stage two, looking at placing the units. So taking all of these units, looking at your site, and then placing them around. And I've even created something for a private open space or public open space for your green area on a development as well. And then I've kind of manipulated and just moved the buildings around just to give a different mix of each building type. And I've color coded them just using the material setting in Revit as well. And then on the final one, kind of site design, I've placed the green area and kind of changed it around to suit maybe a road layout around it. Some cars as well, just placed from the components library within Revit as well, and using just trees as well that I've placed also from the Revit library. And again, you can see I've turned on the shadows. You don't have to have the shadows turned on by any means. So kind of maybe, showing this to a client or a housing developer, how the site might be able to develop. So I'll just show you what I've set up here. So basically in the background, I've got a 3D view of each one. So you can see here, initially I just created a mass of each of one of these. So if I've grouped them all so that if I edit one, they all edit. So I'm just going to ungroup that for a second. If I go in here, I can see that that's a generic model and it's a mass. So how I'd start creating something like that is, I'm just going to go into my top view. I'm going to go to my architecture tab, component, model in place, very simple. And I'm going to assign a category to it, a family category. And I'm going to call it just generic model. You can call it anything you want. You can call it massing if you want as well. I just want to create a basic extrusion. Um, and I can create a dimensioned extrusion if I know what size I want. So I might want, yeah, say 7 meters down there, 5 meters up there. We know that's going to give us 35 meters on both floors if it's a two-story house. Just hit finish on that. You can see that's kind of created a fairly low depth extrusion, and I can just change what height I want it to be. So I'm gonna make it 5 meters. Say it's two-story. We won't worry about the roof or the pitch of the roof whatsoever for the moment. So basically, I've just created that. I've added those into a group, then just created a group so that if I duplicate this for whatever reason, duplicate it across and keep going with that. If I go in and edit this, change the color or anything like that, so just edit group, I'm going to go back into this. I want to change the material on this. So edit in place, and then left hand side, I just want to change the material. So just select my object, and currently the material is just set by category. That's why it's grey. And I have a couple of different materials set up here in the background as well. So I've got kind of yellow, white. You can create your own if you want. I'm just going to go create new material. So let's create a new material. And I just want to assign some sort of, no, I won't create, I'm just going to assign a color to that, for example. So we'll go with this kind of deep purple color. Hit apply on that. Click OK. And you can see that's updated there. When I hit finish on that, hit finish again, you can see that duplicates across the other one. So every time I duplicate that, make a change, pull that across like so. If I change the shape of this for whatever reason, manipulate the edges of it, maybe I create a roof pitch, it's gonna duplicate then across your whole site as well. Just to show you, that's how you might create the mass. I've also placed some 3D text here. You can change the depth of that as well if it's the type of effect you're going for. It depends what type of effect you want to apply to your drawings. And then this is I might have pulled this in from an OS map or a site survey. This is the actual site itself as well. So I've basically duplicated the number of units I know each time that need to be placed. So a developer might define how many they want on a site, or it could be the local council might define what they want on a particular site as well. So you can just duplicate those around. Then the next 3D view, I've just placed them, just moved them around, just manipulated them, moved each one. You can move that there if you want, slightly change it back if you want, create a kind of step effect as well if you want. And you can see there's various different ones here as well, so you can start to move them around to different locations if you wish there, and start to add more detail if you want. I've also added in some shading, so if I type in GD, I've turned on smooth lines with anti-aliasing. I've also turned on cast shadows, ambient shadows as well. Now, ambient shadows, you can kind of see there's a slightly gradient shadow on each surface. That's what ambient shadow does. If I hit that and then hit apply, you can see it slightly disappears. Now, if I was to export this as a PDF, it would retain the vector lines as a PDF. You keep zooming in and they retain as vector lines. If you turn on ambient shadows, it will only convert it to a JPEG version. So if you zoom in, it will eventually become blurry. So just to remember that, the difference between ambient shadows and creating vector images as well. So I've placed the units around there. I've also created something for public open space. I've just created the required floor area, or the required finished surface area of that as well. Then in the third one, again, just kind of manipulate them around, moved each unit around, give it a kind of mix, make it look a bit more like a bit of variation in a housing estate, for example. And then on the final one, I've placed trees and stuff like that. And you can see I've actually turned on ambient shadows, placed cars, and placed some trees around there. And these trees are just taken, you can see here on the left-hand side, they're just taken from the planting Revit objects library as well. And then you can even go and create a 3D view if you want as well. Fairly basic looking, but you can manipulate it to maybe appear slightly differently. I've added in a gradient into the background. So if I type in GD for graphic display, go to background again, I can turn on sky if I want. We'll see how that looks. That's probably a bit dark. You can turn it off so it's completely white if you want that sort of look. But I'm going to leave the gradient on. I can change the ground color as well. I can maybe make the ground color just a bit lighter so maybe it blends in so you don't see it here. A bit more of a white or grey color. You can see there it completely disappears into the horizon. You can also hide these trees if you want. But what you can see here is the thickness on each vector line around the buildings as well. So I'm going to go back into this one and just explain this for a moment. So when I select one of these, so you'll see at the start when I started to create my mass, I defined it as a generic model. So this is how you change the thickness of those particular lines. So I'm going to go into Manage, I'm going to go into Object Styles, and I'm going to go down to my model objects, and I'm just going to scroll down to generic models, where we are. Generic models, and you can see the projection line on that is set to 8. If I change that to 5, hit apply, it's going to update everywhere because everything is set to generic model. So depending what size of kind of diagram look you're going for, you might want a thicker or a thinner line or whatever, but that's how you control it in the background as well. Each individual color you used is created from your materials library, like I showed at the start. You just create a separate material for each one, depending what look you're going for. And then at the end of this, I kind of manipulated the green open space just to place that around as well. And then at the end of all that, I just place them all in a sheet. Might be something that you show to a client, or present to a local council or stakeholders in a project as well. Just to explain, your development idea, you're kind of starting quite diagrammatic here with your units layout as well. And then you're showing how they're placed around the site, kind of arrange them with a bit more thought out as well. And then, adding some sort of landscaping detail into that as well. So that's just a brief overview of how you might create diagrams using Autodesk Revit.